Welcome back. We're celebrating International Women's Day today, and while the country has made great strides in achieving gender equality, most Americans still think discrimination against women is still a problem. In our exclusive daily poll from the Hill-HarrisX, we found that 81% of Americans think women face some form of discrimination. That includes 83% of women and 79% of men. A quarter of women say they face a lot of discrimination, fairly close to the 19% of men who agree. Democrats are more likely to say women face discrimination than Republicans. There's a 19% split between the parties on that one. On the flip side, slight majorities of independents and Republicans say men are more discriminated against, but only 38% of Democrats agree. While 49% of Americans overall believe men face discrimination, 58% of men and 57% of the GOP say that men are discriminated against. So, Rob, you're a man.
True.
Are you facing a lot of discrimination on this panel and in life?
No. I mean, again, I hate to harp back on the same theme, but again, there's this relative position in society where you had men occupying all of, having their hands on all the major levers of the economy, politics, culture, and there is the perception, I think, that again, having more people at the table is one in which suddenly my gender, is being discriminated against. That's the interpretation of it. Yeah.
All right, so Sophia, this question of male discrimination versus women discrimination, what are we to make of it based on this poll data?
I think it's a lack of education. I think a lot of the conversations that women have around discrimination, they have amongst themselves. They don't incorporate men into the conversation, so men don't realize. I think a lot of men don't realize what women in this country face on a day-to-day basis because it's not an open conversation the same way race has been for a longer time. Groups like Black Lives Matter, for instance, make it explicit. And until the Me Too movement, there hadn't been a larger conversation about, a sustained conversation, I should say. There's things pop up. And I think it's educational. I agree with Rob, obviously.
Are women talking and men not listening?
Women are talking, or who are they talking to? Though I think they need to talk. The conversation can't just be, this is what we face, fix it. It has to be, this is what we face. Do you see it? Have you participated? And how are you going to call it out? And I think that's an educational, sensitive conversation, just like with any other issue.
I think the other piece of it too is, so even the framing there, right, is like, are women talking but men aren't listening? But the other piece of it is men aren't talking about it. We've just started to see the ball a little bit begin to roll on this in the larger cultural ways. But that the burden here really has to be on men to sort of have internal policing a little bit, to start to set the norms about what it means to be masculine in a modern era and how we can start to do away with a lot of the histories of discrimination that has come along with those previous incarnations of masculine identity.
I mean, the thing about it is we talk about, look, there's not a lot of difference when it comes to people perceiving that there is still discrimination against women. The question, I think, starts to get to how do we solve these problems, right? Because when you look around at the numbers are pretty hard to deny. The number of CEOs who are men, the number of entrepreneurs who get funded who are men, the number of people who are finishing medical school, and there are all these different categories where women are clearly not being represented at the numbers they exist in society. The question, this is also true with people of color, the question becomes, how do we fix the problems? And I think that's the place where we end up wrestling through some pretty gnarly discussions about what do we do to get there. There's a lot of questions about pipeline. We got to get more people into the pipeline. Got to educate more people, make it work. The problem then is you get a bunch of people through the pipeline, and then you still find the same number of people who are decision makers are all the same, that still make up the same cast of people who were there from before. So there's something more than just a pipeline problem that's happening in America.
So I think one aspect of it, just to even break it down to two categories, right? A lot of the ways that we talk about discrimination in the United States is it's individual level behavior. It is I, as a person, might have X, Y, and Z, discriminate against these groups, and then when I go out and make decisions, that's why we're seeing all these sort of negative effects. There's another portion of it, let's just take gender as an example, where there are systems in place that are perpetuating discrimination. So, right, we have office culture and workplace norms that have been developed over the course of the 20th century and the start of the 21st century that are mostly male-dominated and pointed towards a very particular type of workplace environment in which it's really just men for the most part. So part of the reason why we're seeing some of these things beyond people's just individual discrimination is the fact that we have all these norms and institutions set up that are really not built around having a more diverse workforce, a more diverse culture.
All right, we've got another point we want to make here before we take off. The Trump administration has made a few policy proposals that directly target the LGBTQ community, and specifically transgender individuals. While 84% of Americans say that transgender, gay, and lesbian people face some form of discrimination, the intensity is a bit higher with the transgender community. 41% say transgender Americans face a lot of discrimination, compared to 35% saying the same of gay and lesbian Americans. Republicans are also about 20 percentage points less likely than Democrats to say that LGBT people face discrimination, but still about 75% of Republicans say it's real. So, Sophia, maybe one of the questions, this is, your feedback loop point, I think keeps coming back here. I think a lot more people may know someone who's gay or lesbian. A lot fewer people know somebody who's transgender. And so maybe we just aren't educated enough to figure out what those dynamics are. Is that possible about the reason why there's some discrepancy here?
Yeah, and I'd only add to that, then it's the media's responsibility to accurately represent those stories. I think in the Trump era specifically, I don't think there's any group that has seen more of a change between two administrations in federal policy, out of the Department of Education, the Civil Rights Office out of there.
The Department of Defense.
Right.
Yeah, I think there was the Obama administration was going to allow transgender Americans to serve in the military openly. The Trump administration is trying to stop it.
So there's no other group that has seen their freedoms rolled back as quickly than transgender Americans. And I think that it's the media's responsibility to tell that story.
Let me tell you this, I'm not going to Afghanistan or Iraq, so if somebody else wants to go, they can have at it. I don't care what their background is, they can go. All right, coming up, it's time for a pop quiz. As we stated earlier, it's International Women's Day today, and so we want to know who is America's most influential woman. That's next on What America's Thinking.